Floor, and you know what I'm talking about here on my channel right now.
Hi besties, welcome to my channel. There is so much information pouring out right now with the unsealing of documents that it honestly feels like the pressure valve is about to burst. Every time one filing drops, it opens 3 new doors. Every deposition creates 5 new questions. And if you're trying to track it all in real time, it feels less like covering a lawsuit and more like covering a live playoff series where the score keeps changing mid-quarter. We've got the Olympics kicking off overseas. We've got the Super Bowl dominating headlines. But let's be honest, if you've been following this case, you know the real Super Bowl is happening inside the Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni legal arena, and today's lead. It's a quiet bombshell. Newly surfaced communications strongly suggest that cast members from It Ends With Us knew Justin Baldoni was going to be dropped by WME before he himself publicly acknowledged it. Let that sink in. This isn't just gossip. This isn't just someone saying, "Oh, I bet he'll lose representation." No. The tone of these messages implies expectation, confidence, certainty, and that changes the atmosphere of this entire narrative. For context, WME isn't just an agency. It's a power hub. If you're dropped by WME in the middle of controversy, that's not a quiet administrative update, that's a signal flare in Hollywood. And according to these documents, one cast member in particular, Brandon Schleener, appeared to operate under the assumption that Baldoni's drop was not hypothetical. The language matters. It wasn't, "If they drop him, it'll snowball." It was, "Once they drop him, it'll snowball." That's not speculation. That's anticipation, and here's why this matters. If cast members knew an agency move was coming before the public narrative unfolded, that suggests conversations were happening behind closed doors long before the public allegations crystallized in media form. Hollywood runs on whisper networks. But whisper networks that intersect with agency leverage. That's a different level. Brandon was signed to WME. Blake Lively has long-standing industry power. Ari Emanuel runs WME. If you connect those dots, the optics become uncomfortable. Was this just industry gossip, or was this coordinated positioning? The silence that followed. Remember when several cast members publicly voiced support for Blake after the New York Times article dropped? It felt immediate, almost synchronized. But then, silence. No follow-up clarifications. No nuance reflections after more documents surfaced. No revisiting initial assumptions when audio recordings contradicted earlier claims. Just quiet. And here's where the analogy fits. It was like watching someone sprint down a fast break for what they thought was an easy dunk, only for the ball to slam off the rim. They went all in early. But once contradictory evidence emerged, they didn't double down. They just stopped talking. Now, some will say, "That's smart. Don't inflame the situation." Others will say, "If you were confident enough to speak up publicly, why not stay consistent?" That tension is what's driving so much online reaction. The bot narrative. One of the core claims from Blake's side has been that Baldoni had a pre-planned digital machine ready. Bots, narrative control, crisis management. But here's the nuance. Preparing crisis PR does not automatically equal deploying bots. That's an accusation. And it requires proof. If you're a producer-director entering a contentious professional dynamic, you'd be irresponsible not to consult crisis advisors. That's not guilt. That's modern risk management. The problem is this: once the word bots enters public consciousness, it frames perception, and perception, especially in Hollywood, is currency. Most people, myself included, initially reacted strongly to the New York Times article. It painted a troubling picture. It was compelling. It felt cohesive, but then counter-evidence began surfacing. Audio clips that didn't align with earlier characterizations. Context that complicated what seemed straightforward. And when inconsistencies appear, it doesn't automatically mean someone's innocent, but it does mean the story isn't clean. That stretching problem. Here's where credibility becomes fragile. If someone has a strong case, they don't need embellishment. When Blake's complaint included details that later appeared exaggerated, like framing a seasoned Shakespearean actor as merely a friend hired unfairly, that weakens confidence, not because the central claim is false, but because unnecessary dramatization makes audiences question what else might be overstated. The lip-biting allegation, the scenting claim. Moments where audio didn't align with description. Each one may seem small individually, but together they create friction, and friction erodes certainty. Brandon Schleener's position. Now let's return to Brandon. From a career standpoint, what's he supposed to do? His rising His profile expanded after this project. He's attached to high-profile series like 1923. He's navigating an industry that runs on relationships. If you publicly side against Blake Lively, a star with deep industry alliances, that's not a neutral move. If you stay quiet, people call you opportunistic. If you hedge, people call you calculated. That's the trap of Hollywood politics. But the text exchange suggesting foreknowledge of WME's decision introduces a different dimension. Leverage. If the cast believed Baldoni was about to be institutionally isolated, supporting Blake becomes the safer bet. Power gravitates toward power, and in that moment, it may have looked like Blake had the upper hand. The agency drop and snowball effect. The sequence matters. Allegations surface, agency drop follows toward recognition revoked. Public narrative solidifies. If agency action was anticipated internally before step 1 fully unfolded publicly, that's significant. Because agency drops don't happen randomly. They're calculated, and when representation changes in lockstep with narrative shifts, people start asking whether industry pressure preceded public outrage, or vice versa. It's not conspiracy. It's power mechanics. Hollywood isn't just creative. It's hierarchical. Isabella Ferr's deposition, that educated guess. Then we move to deposition excerpts. When asked directly about assumptions regarding Baldoni's media appearances, Isabella described her conclusion as an educated guess. That phrase matters. An educated guess isn't evidence. It's inference, and under oath, inference doesn't carry the same weight as documented fact. Repeatedly, when pressed about who told her what regarding marketing strategy, the answer became hazy. I don't recall. I just showed up. I believe it was through Sony. That doesn't automatically invalidate her perspective, but it does show how much of this early outrage may have been based on perception rather than documented coordination. Feminism, power, and narrative loyalty. There's another layer here that makes this case uniquely combustible. Man versus woman cases in Hollywood are not neutral cultural events. They trigger larger ideological reflexes. Many women initially rallied behind Blake, not because they hate Baldoni, but because historically, women who speak up face backlash. That instinct is understandable, but feminism is not blind allegiance to whoever claims harm. It's about fairness, accountability, and truth, even when that truth complicates your preferred narrative. If evidence contradicts parts of a story, acknowledging that isn't betrayal. It's intellectual honesty, and this is where audiences have fractured. Some feel supporting Blake is supporting women. Others feel ignoring contradictions undermines credibility for future legitimate victims. That tension is not trivial. It's cultural. The house on the market. Then there's the personal layer. Baldoni listing his renovated Ojai estate for nearly $9 million. 5 bedrooms, 10 acres, yoga dome. Mediterranean primary residence. He purchased it for $2.2 million in 2020 and invested heavily in renovations. Is selling proof of financial strain, not necessarily litigation. At this level is expensive. Reputation damage impacts future projects. Strategic liquidity decisions happen all the time during lawsuits, but optics matter. When someone lists their dream home during a legal war, it feeds narrative speculation. Is he bracing for impact, or simply capitalizing on market timing? We don't know. But people will project meaning onto it. The bigger question, the central issue, isn't whether Blake is innocent or Baldoni is innocent. The central issue is whether the timeline of power moves preceded the moral outrage, or followed it. Did institutions react organically, or did they respond to internal influence before the public story reached full force? If cast members knew Baldoni's professional fate was sealed before he did, that suggests narrative momentum was not purely reactive, and that's what makes this development important. Because careers in Hollywood aren't ended by jury verdicts, they re-ended by perception, and perception can be engineered long before legal clarity arrives. The circumcision conversation Blake Lively referenced in her statements has drawn a lot of attention, and understandably so. On the surface, it seems unusual, even inappropriate. But context matters. Lively was pregnant and discussing parenting decisions, a topic many parents, especially new mothers, navigate with friends and family. Conversations about circumcision aren't inherently scandalous, they're part of the real-world dialogue about children's health and future. Misrepresenting or sensationalizing this detail inflates the perception of misconduct beyond what actually occurred. The documents suggest that Blake framed this conversation as more troubling than it might objectively have been, which again feeds into the larger debate about narrative control. Moving from personal matters to broader industry manipulation, we have new commentary about how feminist principles were invoked in defense of Blake Lively. Certain online factions appeared to adopt her story as a litmus test of feminist allegiance, which created a cognitive dissonance. On one hand, they wanted to uphold feminist values, on the other, they seemed to selectively disregard evidence contradicting her claims. This behavior underscores a larger cultural tension: loyalty to a narrative versus accountability for facts. In other words, some supporters treated the case as a binary fight between male and female rather than a complex dispute requiring nuanced judgment. The deposition of Isabella Farah adds another layer of insight. When asked about her opinions on Baldoni's media appearances, she characterized her understanding as an educated guess. She admitted she didn't know all the details and sometimes relied on vague guidance from the studio. While she appeared confident in her recollection, the lack of concrete evidence reveals a gap between perception and fact. It's a reminder that actors on set or in marketing campaigns often operate under partial knowledge. Their statements can be colored by assumptions or advice, making their testimony compelling yet not definitive. Meanwhile, Brandon Sklena's position remains a case study in career calculus. As a rising actor, he faces a delicate balance between self-preservation and authenticity. Publicly supporting Blake Lively, especially with internal knowledge of WME's decision to drop Baldoni, was arguably the safer career move. Hollywood thrives on alliances and perception. In an environment where power gravitates toward influence, aligning with the perceived victor can feel pragmatic, even if morally ambiguous. The documents highlight this phenomenon clearly. Industry actors often hedge their positions based on projected outcomes rather than absolute truth. Shifting to Justin Baldoni's personal situation, his decision to list his Ojai estate amid ongoing litigation has fueled speculation. The estate, purchased for $2.2 million and renovated into a nearly $9 million compound, symbolizes both aspiration and vulnerability. Selling it now might be a strategic move for liquidity or simply a market-driven decision, but in the public eye, it feeds narratives of financial strain or fallout. Litigation at this level is costly, and legal battles can significantly impact a producer's ability to generate new projects. Baldoni's sale, intentional or circumstantial, is now intertwined with the public perception of his career trajectory. The broader social conversation surrounding this case has highlighted how quickly public opinion can ossify. Once the initial New York Times article dropped, many immediately assumed Baldoni's guilt. Subsequent evidence challenging that narrative was largely ignored by those who had already committed to one side. This illustrates how social media, fandom loyalty, and industry prestige can amplify selective truths and create echo chambers. People aren't just interpreting evidence, they're interpreting the interpretation of evidence, which accelerates momentum in unpredictable ways. At the heart of this dispute lies the mechanism of influence itself. Institutional decisions, such as agency drops, award revocations, or media coverage, often precede or shape public perception. In Baldoni's case, the anticipation of his agency being dropped before the official announcement indicates a preemptive alignment of narrative and power. Hollywood careers aren't usually ended by lawsuits, they're ended by perception. And perception can be influenced, or even engineered, long before legal clarity is reached. This reality casts a new light on the stakes of every statement, deposition, and social media post in this saga. Finally, the psychological dimension cannot be ignored. Public reactions have revealed how identity, ideology, and allegiance intersect with fact evaluation. Those invested in Blake Lively's story as a feminist touchstone have often disregarded inconsistencies, while others emphasize evidence over affiliation. This is not a trivial observation, it illustrates a broader phenomenon where cultural narratives override nuanced critical thinking. The interplay of personal bias, power structures, and media framing creates a volatile environment where truth becomes negotiable and loyalty is often performative. In summary, the unsealed documents and deposition excerpts shed light on a layered and complex picture. They reveal preemptive knowledge among cast members, the strategic calculations behind public statements, and the cultural tensions driving audience perception. Justin Baldoni's career, personal life, and reputation intersect with powerful industry forces, creating a situation where facts, perception, and narrative collide. The Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni case is more than a legal battle, it's a case study in power dynamics, media influence, and the fragility of reputation in the age of digital amplification. The story continues to unfold, and every new document, deposition, or public statement adds yet another layer to an already intricate and high-stakes narrative.